they actually don't really even look like they're living a lot of times, and they live in these incredibly adverse environments. That's characteristic of a lot of long-lived species. Is there a clue there?
Well, these species that don't have a lot of predation live a long time, but also in these extreme environments, they're turning on their body's defenses against aging. And we can do that to ourselves. It's a concept called hormesis. And again, we'll get to that in other episodes. Adversity, as long as it doesn't hurt your body, will make you healthier and live long.
Okay, and I do take your point that, there's vast similarities across all living organisms, but I do think also it's hard to make the argument that a tree is something that we can learn from. We don't need to even make that argument because there are these other organisms, right? Going, from sort of like a bristlecone pine, which is a plant, to a sponge, which is an animal, to a mollusk, which is an animal, to a whale, which is a mammal. And we're getting closer and closer to humans. And across all of these categories, we've got organisms that have learned how to live a lot longer than we do.
We're essentially upright whales. That sounds crazy, but at the molecular level, if you look at the biochemistry, we're only separated by 40 million years, which is a blink of an eye in geological time. We actually could live as long as whales. There's not that much difference between us.
We know bowhead whales can live for more than 200 years.
Well, yeah, and they know that how?
They know that because, for a number of reasons. There's actually been some really cool studies on this, but one of the reasons is that they dated a harpoon that was stuck in a bowhead whale for 200 years. And the whale was still living when they pulled it out of the whale. Well, I think they whaled it, but...
Yeah, well, what's interesting is we now have the genome of these animals, and we can see that they have multiple copies of what we call longevity genes, some of which we discovered in my 20s. These are genes that protect the body. Longevity genes actually get turned on by adversity, and there are ways we can tweak them. But whales naturally have multiple copies, higher levels of these longevity protective mechanisms, and the bristlecone pine has just whopping amounts.
That's that connection that you're making there. You're like, Look, we see this in a bristlecone pine, we see this in a whale, and by the way, this gene also exists in humans.
Yeah, we're not that different from a banana, actually. Genomes are 40%.
You're not that different from a banana.
Yeah, well... I'm not going to go there, Matt. But the important thing is that when you study other organisms, whether it's a banana or a yeast cell or a worm or a fly, we can learn lessons about biology and especially about aging. We can learn more about aging from a yeast cell than we can about Alzheimer's or cancer.
This is why you're dismissive about people's dismissiveness, like only in mice. When people say, we discovered this, and people go, only in mice. But there's a lot we can learn from mice.
Well, we can. And aging is one of these universal things. Really is remarkable that we've learned in my lab over the last 20 years is that the same genes that control aging in yeast work in worms and flies, mice, and even humans. That's a big deal. We didn't know that 30 years ago. Now we know that there's a fundamental set of genes that controls how fast we live. And then we can also exploit that to slow down our own aging now. And as we'll get to later, we can use that knowledge to even reverse the aging process.
We were talking about these genes. Let's name some of these genes.
So there are various categories. There are hundreds of longevity genes that are known, but they fall into three main buckets. The first one, it's called mtor. It's a little m for mammal, and tor, target of rapamycin. So mtor is a longevity gene that makes a protein that senses amino acids. So when you eat a big steak, mtor activity actually is activated, and mtor now says, okay, I've got lots of protein. I'm going to make muscle. I'm going to burn energy. And that's why when you eat a steak, you build up muscle more than if you don't eat a lot of protein.
Is that a good thing?
No, it's actually not. What you want is to have mTOR levels low. And when you have low mTOR activity, that's when you get the longest lifespan. Mice that are given a drug called rapamycin, which is used to suppress the immune system in patients, but you can take low doses as a human or give it in low doses to a mouse. Those mice live dramatically longer. Even if you give them rapamycin when they're 20 months of age, which is a really old mouse, that'd be like a 75-year-old human, they still live longer. So low activity of mTOR is a signal that times are tough. You don't have enough food. Hunker down, build a stronger body, survive, and the outcome of that is longer life. But it turns out it's not just for mice. You give rapamycin to a yeast cell, fly, or a worm, they also live longer. So you can tap in with these drugs into this universal longevity program, one of which is mTOR.
And so you have a long-term colleague who's been working on mTOR for a really long time. I know you're really impressed with their work.
I think you're referring to Matt Kaberlein?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's doing great work. His latest work that's fascinating is he's treating dogs with rapamycin and showing that it protects their heart. And he's also going to test their lifespan.
And we're seeing in dogs what we saw in yeast and mice, and the rapamycin works, this target of rapamycin, this gene, influenced in a certain way, works the same way across species.
Right. And that's why I think solving aging is going to be easier than solving cancer and heart disease, because aging is fundamentally conserved. We can make rapid progress extending the lifespan of little yeast cells, worms with chemicals, and then put them into humans. And hopefully we'll see they'll work the same way like rapamycin seems to do, and other molecules that we're going to get to in later episodes. But the point here is that aging is not that complicated once you understand the genes that control it, and then the fundamental causes of aging.